The true crown is not the one placed upon the head, but the one forged in the silence of falls and in the discipline of always rising again. Have you ever noticed how most people live chained to an illusion? They walk the streets believing they are free because they can choose what to wear, what to eat, who to talk to. But this is the first trap of the modern world, confusing superficial choices with true power. Centuries ago, Machiavelli had already understood that most people are not masters of their own lives. They are guided by expectations, manipulated by opinions, and enslaved by desires that are not their own. The common man believes he is king of himself because he can raise his voice, because he can protest, because he can consume. But he fails to see that in silence, he is shaped by invisible forces that force him to obey without realizing it. This is the tragedy of those born slaves without iron chains, but with psychological shackles that weigh even more heavily. What does it mean to be a king? It's not about crowns, thrones, or castles, but the ability to rule your own destiny, to make decisions without needing the world's approval, to stand tall when everyone expects you to kneel. To be a king is to master your instincts, control your fear, and assert your presence even when silence seems suffocating. To be a slave, however, is to live at the mercy of others, even if those others are merely internal voices implanted by the fear of rejection, the need to be accepted, the desperate desire to be loved. How many times have you done something against your will just to avoid disappointing someone? How many times have you failed to say no because you feared losing someone's favor? In that moment, you weren't a king, you were a slave. And each time this happens, the crown that should be upon your head is placed at the feet of those who know how to manipulate your weakness. Machiavelli asserted that men oscillate between two poles. Either they dominate or they are dominated. There is no neutrality in the game of power. Even when you believe you're not playing, someone is playing with you. The slave thinks that by staying outside the game, he will be protected. But that is precisely where he becomes the easiest prey, for the world does not allow neutrality. The silence of the naive is not respected, it is exploited. The man who does not control his own image will be controlled by the image others create of him. This is the first cruel lesson. Either you learn to master the world's perception of you, or you will become its hostage. Consider how society cultivates illusions. They say that humility is the supreme virtue, that showing weakness is a sign of humanity, that transparency is proof of character. All of this may sound nice, but Machiavelli clearly saw that such virtues, when displayed without calculation, are nothing more than traps. A king may appear humble, but never be truly humble to the point of becoming vulnerable. A king may appear compassionate, but must never allow compassion to make him manipulable. The difference is stark. The slave is humble because he has no choice. The king appears humble because he knows this mask builds trust. The slave is transparent because he doesn't understand the value of secrecy. The king reveals only what strengthens his position. The slave takes pride in being predictable. The king takes pride in being an enigma. And what makes this reflection even more disturbing is realizing that most people unconsciously choose to remain enslaved. They prefer the security of pleasing everyone to the pain of maintaining their own sovereignty. They constantly chase approval, like dogs hungry for scraps of social acceptance. The king, on the other hand, inspires fear and respect precisely because he depends on no one's approval. He is able to stand alone, to bear the weight of silence, to act even when everyone turns their backs on him. This is the essence of invincible power, to endure the loneliness that enslaves the majority. Stop for a moment and think, how many of your decisions were born of fear? The fear of losing a job, the fear of being rejected, the fear of appearing different, the fear of failing. Each of these fears is an invisible chain, and while you obey these fears, someone stronger takes advantage of your submission. The boss who senses your insecurity uses it to pay you less. The partner who notices your need to be loved turns it into emotional control. The friend who sees your fear of rejection uses it to manipulate your choices. The world is full of predators, and the weak give up their crowns without realizing it. Machiavelli didn't see goodness and evil as absolute concepts, but as strategic weapons. Those who don't understand this are already defeated. And perhaps the harshest truth is this: we are all born slaves. Slaves to our emotions, slaves to family expectations, slaves to the narratives we've been told since childhood. We're told we should be kind, pleasant, submissive to the common good. And of course, society needs this illusion to function, because if everyone were kings, there would be no one willing to carry the burden of service. The system needs servants, and so the system teaches that being a servant is noble. Anyone who breaks this illusion is immediately seen as cold, arrogant, and dangerous. But it is precisely this label that separates kings from slaves. Those who do not fear being hated discover the power that no praise can offer. Consider, what is more valuable, being loved by many or being feared by all? Being loved is comfortable, but unstable. Love fades with a mistake, a misinterpreted word, a change of heart. Fear, however, is enduring because it is born of respect and unpredictability. A slave begs to be loved and in the end is discarded. A king builds respect even in silence because he doesn't sell himself cheap. This difference is what keeps one on the throne and the other chained. You might ask, but isn't it possible to live without trying to please? Isn't it risky to isolate oneself and ignore the judgment of others? And this is where Machiavelli is at his most cruel and realistic. Living is already taking risks. The slave runs risks every day. The risk of being exploited, the risk of being discarded, the risk of being betrayed. He simply doesn't realize it because he's numbed by the illusion of security. The king, on the other hand, faces the risk head-on and transforms it into a tool. He takes on the weight of rejection and converts it into strength. He embraces solitude and transforms it into discipline. He dons the mask of virtue when it's useful and removes it without hesitation when it's necessary to command respect. The beginning of the journey from slave to king lies not in dominating the external world, but in breaking the enchantment that binds us to illusions. The impact is painful. Discovering that your most exalted virtues were actually chains in disguise is like waking up in a prison without walls. Realizing you locked the door yourself, the initial shock is inevitable. You realize that every time you sought acceptance, you strengthened another's power over you. That every time you feared rejection, you surrendered your crown. That every time you believed that uncalculated kindness was enough, you signed your own sentence of slavery. But the good news is that the key has always been in your hands. Machiavelli knew that power is a mental construct before it is practical. If you can change your perception, you can change your position in the game. It's not about abandoning kindness or humility, but using them as conscious tools, not automatic reflexes. It's not about never seeking acceptance, but about never depending on it. It's not about never showing yourself vulnerable, but about choosing when and to whom you do so. This subtle distinction is what transforms slaves into kings. And here arises the burning question: how long will you continue to live as a slave? How long will you believe that being loved is enough? How long will you pride yourself on your own transparency, while your life is controlled by those who know how to wear masks? How long will you beg for recognition instead of building respect? This is the decision that separates ordinary men from invincible men. The decision to tear off your own chains, even if it means being hated, feared, or rejected. Because in the end, the king who bears the weight of hatred is freer than the slave who lives surrounded by false smiles. In the silence of this revelation, the first turning point emerges. You don't have to accept the crown the world didn't give you. You just have to stop giving yours away. Machiavelli's secret begins here, realizing that the true prison lies not in what the world imposes on you, but in what you accept to bear. To be a king is to refuse to live in the shadows of imposed expectations. To be a slave is to remain on your knees before comforting illusions. And now that you've understood the first part of this enigma, there's only one choice left: continue denying it or face the truth. Because as Machiavelli knew, those who don't control their own reality will inevitably be controlled by someone else. But are you ready for the next step? The moment when discipline becomes the key to liberation and the mind becomes a fortress? Have you ever felt like you're losing control of your life? As if every step is being pushed by invisible forces you can't control? It's like waking up every day with the feeling that something essential is slipping through your fingers, even when you try to organize, plan, and set goals. This frustration is common, and it's at this point that the difference between being a slave and being a king begins. Because life isn't just made up of external choices, but of a silent war that takes place within your mind. Machiavelli understood this like few others. True power doesn't begin on the throne, but in the inner discipline that allows a man to stand firm, even when everything around him seems to be crumbling. Think about how many times you've been defeated not by real enemies but by your own emotions. How many opportunities you've missed because fear paralyzed you, because anxiety robbed you of clarity, because anger made you say things you shouldn't. In that moment, you weren't king. You were a slave to yourself. The external enemy is almost never as dangerous as the internal enemy, and this is where the invisible fortress that separates the invincible from the fragile is built. A king is not one who never feels fear or anger, but one who masters these impulses, who uses them as fuel rather than allowing them to become chains. Imagine a simple situation. You're in a work meeting, brimming with powerful ideas that could transform how others perceive you. But faced with the possibility of criticism, you fall silent. The opportunity passes, someone else speaks, attention shifts, and you realize you've missed a decisive moment. This silence wasn't strategic. It was submission. You were a slave to the need to avoid discomfort. Now imagine another scenario. You hold back your words not out of fear, but out of calculation, because you know that in that moment the best weapon is to observe, wait, and launch your idea at the right moment so that everyone depends on it. This silence is no longer weakness. It is discipline. The difference is subtle, but it is this subtlety that builds or destroys kingdoms. Discipline is painful because it requires direct confrontation with the part of us that prefers immediate comfort. The slave chooses instant gratification, even if it costs him his freedom in the long run. The king chooses momentary sacrifice because he sees beyond, because he knows that his victory depends on enduring the pain that others avoid. How many times have you stopped training, studying, and preparing simply because you gave in to fatigue or distraction? Each time this happens, you bow to a force less powerful than yourself, and there is no prison more humiliating than being dominated by your own impulses. Machiavelli understood that governing a people was, in a sense, similar to governing oneself. A prince who cannot impose discipline on his own life will be unable to control his kingdom. Likewise, a man who cannot control his reactions will never control the course of his history. This comparison is more than a metaphor. It shows that every small daily choice is a reflection of how you handle power. The way you react to an offense, the time you dedicate to the unimportant, the attention you give to those who don't deserve it. Every decision shapes the wall or the breach in your inner fortress. And here's the disturbing detail. Most people hand over the keys to this fortress voluntarily. A single false compliment is enough to make them feel confident. A superficial criticism is enough to make them crumble. They live hostage to words, as if every external opinion were capable of defining their worth. Machiavelli knew that this type of person will never be invincible, because those who need constant approval are already defeated before they even fight. The king, by contrast, trains his mind to endure both glory and contempt. He knows both are momentary illusions. The applause fades, the criticism disappears, but the discipline remains. Perhaps you've experienced the pain of feeling small in front of someone who seemed to control the room with their mere presence. And perhaps you've thought, why can't I be like that? The answer lies precisely in the invisible discipline this person has built over time. Respect isn't born by chance. It's the result of the ability to remain unshakable when everyone else loses their balance. You can see it in the details. The calm gaze of someone who isn't shaken by provocations. The firmness in the posture of someone who isn't affected by humiliation. The confidence of someone who doesn't beg for recognition. This is the aura that transforms ordinary people into kings in the eyes of others. Now imagine life as a constant battlefield. On one side, your emotions trying to drag you down. Fear, insecurity, laziness, vanity. On the other, the discipline you cultivate, forged like an invisible sword. Most lose this battle because they never learn to train their minds. They don't realize that every simple choice, to wake up early or oversleep, to speak or to remain silent, to act or to procrastinate, is a decisive battle. And every defeat, no matter how small, weakens the fortress. Every victory, no matter how insignificant, strengthens the walls. A king is built on the repetition of these small daily victories, invisible to others, but decisive for himself. There's a scene that illustrates this perfectly. A man is about to explode in rage after being insulted. Everything in his body demands an immediate reaction, but he takes a deep breath, remains silent, looks the other man in the eye, and doesn't let himself be shaken. The aggressor, expecting chaos, encounters an impenetrable wall. The strength that isn't revealed in shouts becomes more powerful than any words. In that moment, he's no longer a slave to anger, but king of his own emotion. Discipline transforms a banal situation into a silent demonstration of power. But make no mistake, discipline is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to use it as a tool. A king feels fear, but transforms it into strategic caution. He feels sadness, but converts it into focus. He feels anger, but uses it as energy to act at the right moment. The slave, on the other hand, is consumed by these forces like a ship swept by a storm. Discipline is the rudder that keeps the ship on course, even when the winds seem unstoppable. What makes it all even more intriguing is realizing how this logic applies to life's simplest experiences. Consider relationships. How many people blindly surrender to the desire to please, to be accepted, and end up slaves to the other person's affection? They do everything to avoid losing their bond, giving in to emotional blackmail, and believing this is love. But love without discipline is submission. The king, even in love, does not lose his essence, does not bow to manipulation. He gives because he wants to, not because he fears loss. This difference changes everything. It transforms dependence into choice, transforms slavery into sovereignty. At work, the scene repeats itself. The slave is the one who humbles himself for fear of losing his job, who accepts any condition, who remains silent in the face of injustice. The king, even when facing loss, maintains his firm stance, not because he is arrogant, but because he understands that true wealth lies in his own inner strength. He can lose everything and still start over, because discipline gives him the only freedom that cannot be taken away, the freedom not to bow to fear. This is the mystery few dare to face. Discipline liberates more than any material achievement. You can live in a palace and still be a slave to your insecurities. You can be surrounded by wealth and still be held hostage by the fear of loss. You can have the love of many and still live dependent on their every word. The true king can be in an empty room, with nothing but himself, and still remain sovereign, because his fortress cannot be invaded. And here comes an unexpected twist. Discipline is not just defense, but also attack. Those who master themselves learn to dominate others effortlessly. Think of the impact of someone who never allows themselves to be provoked. Those who try to attack them become frustrated, lose strength, and are left exposed. Discipline becomes an invisible weapon that wears down enemies without you having to move. It's like fighting an opponent who never reacts the way you expect. Every attempt to strike them backfires. This is the silent power that Machiavelli knew to be the essence of invincibility. You may be thinking that this journey is impossible, that total discipline is unattainable, but this thought is already part of slavery. The king is not perfect. He simply refuses to be a slave. He fails, makes mistakes, falls, but rises stronger each time. The slave resigns himself to defeat. The king transforms defeat into training. It is in this cycle that the strength the world interprets as invincible is born. Not because he never falls, but because he never stays down. Now you need to ask yourself, how many times in your life have you been king? And how many times have you been a slave? How many times have you reacted impulsively and lost everything? How many times have you remained silent out of fear and missed opportunities? How many times have you let yourself be swept away by momentary passions that imprisoned you for years? With each answer, you will realize that power has always been in your hands, but you surrendered it. Discipline is not something you ask for. It is something you take, like picking up a forgotten sword. And when you finally decide to take up this sword, something extraordinary will happen. The world will begin to bow before you without you having to order it. People will feel the difference in your gaze, your posture, your silence. They will realize that you are no longer a slave to circumstances, that you don't sell yourself short, that you don't bend for convenience. And even without crowns, thrones, or titles, they will see in you what they have always sought in leaders: sovereignty. This is the secret of the second stage, building within yourself the fortress that no one can invade, because no wall is as strong as the discipline that controls the mind. And it is from this fortress that true authority is born, the silent respect that no slave will ever attain. But there is an even darker revelation, something few have the courage to face. Mastering yourself is only half the battle. True power arises when you learn to master the game of others, when you see the invisible board on which everyone is being moved without realizing it. Are you ready to see this board and discover how to transform manipulation into sovereignty? Have you ever noticed that most of the time, you're not the one making the most important decisions in your life? It's as if there's an invisible board, full of pieces that move silently while you believe you're the player. This is the trap. Everyone thinks they're in control, but in reality, they're being pushed by forces they can't see. Machiavelli understood that real power never lies solely in visible action, but in the silent manipulation of perceptions, fears, and desires. Those who see this board before others become sovereign. Those who ignore its existence inevitably become disposable pieces. And here begins the disturbing revelation. You've been used more times than you'd like to admit, not because you're weak, but because you haven't yet learned to see the game behind the scenes. The world is made of signs, but almost no one pays attention to them. A carelessly spoken word, a look that lasts a second too long, a silence at a strategic moment, all of these carry information that escapes most. And it is precisely between the lines that people's true intentions are hidden. The slave believes what he hears and what he sees. The king perceives what is unsaid, understands what has been hidden, deciphers what has been masked. This is why those who master the invisible chessboard always seem to foresee the future. It's not magic. It's a keen reading of what others cannot hide. The truth is that human beings leave traces all the time, and power lies in knowing how to follow these traces until you discover what is truly going on in each person's mind. Now ask yourself this: how many times have you believed someone was on your side, only to discover later that they were always working against you? How many times have you been manipulated with compliments, promises, or sweet words, only to realize the trap when it was too late? These experiences weren't accidental. They were calculated moves on the chessboard of power. And the pain you felt upon discovering this should serve as proof that either you learn to play the game, or you'll always be played. If you look closely, you'll notice that this board is everywhere. In the workplace, colleagues smile as they wait for your downfall. In personal relationships, those who offer affection in exchange for control. Even within the family, where love is often used as a bargaining chip. It's not paranoia, but lucidity. Human beings play even when they don't admit they're playing. They pretend there's no competition, but every gesture, every word, every silence is a subtle play for advantage. This is where Machiavelli is more cruel and more realistic than any philosopher. There is no neutral ground in the game of life. Have you ever stopped to consider how many of your decisions were the result of your own reasoning, and how many were merely responses to what someone else planted in you? Have you ever noticed how a simple insinuation can change your way of thinking? How a single doubt can be enough to erode a certainty? How many choices did you truly make of your own free will? And how many were merely reactions to strategies others put into motion? This is the question that separates kings from slaves. Power lies in foreseeing a move before it happens. Just as a chess master sees 20 moves ahead, a true strategist sees not only what the other player is doing, but also what they want to do, what they fear, and what they would never dare attempt. This vision creates a brutal advantage. You control the battlefield without even raising your sword. The enemy begins to fall into traps they don't even know exist, to stumble over their own intentions, to drown in fears you've already detected before them. And at that point, you stop being just a player and become the architect of the board. But how can we develop this skill without falling into the trap of blind distrust? The secret lies in observing patterns, not chasing ghosts. Humans can disguise themselves for a time, but they always repeat behaviors. Those who fear always show signs of hesitation. Those who seek control always try to impose narratives. Those who envy always let out venom in small comments. Have you ever realized how easy it is to predict people when you start to see beyond their words? Have you ever realized that even the most innocent gestures hide deeper intentions? The difficulty lies in bearing the truth. When you begin to see the bigger picture, you realize that most of the people who claim to be on your side have always been using you. This is painful, but also liberating. It is in this shock that the coldness necessary to rule is born. Because while you delude yourself with universal love, you will be manipulated. When you understand that every gesture has its own agenda, you learn to calculate. The slave is hurt because he expects loyalty where only convenience exists. The king is not hurt because he already expects betrayal, and precisely for this reason, he is prepared to deal with it. Have you ever wondered why some people always seem to come out on top, even when everything indicates they should fall? It's not luck. It's not chance. It's reading. They know when to retreat, when to attack, when to remain silent. They know that most battles are won before they even begin, because the true battlefield is the mind. The body only executes what has already been decided in the invisible. Are you ready to see what others still ignore? Are you willing to accept that every smile can hide a knife, and that every silence can be an ambush? It is at this point that reality becomes darkest. Most cannot bear this knowledge. They prefer to remain blind, believing in empty promises, because illusion hurts less than clarity. But kings do not have this luxury. They must open their eyes and bear the weight of what they see. They must learn to manipulate without ever allowing themselves to be manipulated. And manipulation here is not just deceiving, but directing, controlling, transforming other people's intentions into fuel for one's own ascension. Now reflect. How many times have you fallen into traps by trusting too much? How many times could you have turned a situation around in your favor if you had seen beyond the surface? How many failures could have been victories if you had looked through the eyes of a strategist? These questions are painful, but they are also open doors. Because with each answer, you realize there is still time to learn to see the invisible board and move your own pieces masterfully. Life is like a game that never ends. There's no sign of a beginning, no warning of an end. The pieces are already in motion before you were born, and they will continue to be in motion when you're no longer here. What makes the difference is how you choose to participate, as a piece that moves at the whim of others, or as a player who decides where each piece should be. This choice isn't comfortable, because it requires you to abandon your naivete and embrace the hardness of seeing the world as it truly is. But it's this hardness that forges the invincible. So, ask yourself, are you ready to stop being a pawn? Are you prepared to accept that the games around you were never fair? Are you willing to turn every manipulation against you into a weapon in your favor? Because that's the only way to become king on a board that devours the weak without mercy. But the game doesn't end there. If you've already learned to see invisible movements, you now need to discover how to hide your own, how to lift the mask that confuses enemies and shields your true intentions. Are you ready to don this mask? The mask is the oldest and, at the same time, the most modern weapon a man can carry. From the earliest tribal rituals to the most sophisticated political strategies, humanity has discovered that the visible face is never just a face, it is a battlefield. Those who reveal too much become vulnerable. Those who reveal too little can generate distrust. But those who master the balance between showing and hiding gain the power to shape others' perceptions, like a sculptor shapes stone. Machiavelli understood this viscerally. He knew that men judge more by what they see than by what they truly are, and that behind every apparent virtue may lie cold calculation, silent manipulation, and a secret that will never be revealed. Being a king is not just ruling territories, but ruling images, and it is through the mask that this dominion is built. Think about how the people around you are obsessed with appearing to be something. Someone pretends to be richer, happier, wiser, more generous than they really are. Not because they love the lie, but because they know, albeit instinctively, that the world reacts not to who you are, but to what you appear to be. A person with a confident posture attracts respect even when they are filled with doubts inside. A person who exudes serenity generates trust even when they are in turmoil. A person who displays coolness in moments of tension appears powerful, even when they are on the verge of crumbling inside. The mask creates social reality before any action can sustain it. And the question you need to ask yourself is simple. If everyone already wears masks, is yours a weakness or a weapon? There are historical accounts that reinforce this principle. Consider Julius Caesar, who, upon returning to Rome after military campaigns, paraded in triumph surrounded by riches, prisoners, and symbols of victory. But the little discussed detail is that many of these performances were carefully exaggerated to create an image of invincibility. It didn't matter if he had lost battles along the way, or if his enemies were still alive. Before the people, the mask of the invincible king was stronger than any fact. The people didn't analyze reports, didn't read documents, didn't investigate. They saw the image, and the image became truth. Caesar knew he ruled as much by the sword as by the theater. Another curious example comes from Louis XIV, the Sun King. He transformed his life into a daily spectacle at the Palace of Versailles. His routine, from waking to meals, was accompanied by courtiers in public rituals. Every gesture, every look, every word was part of a grand theater that kept everyone dependent on his presence. The mask of absolute grandeur was so powerful that, even when the state was in debt, his figure continued to radiate power. He ruled not only through politics, but through constant theatrics. It was impossible not to believe in his strength, because his mask was solid as stone. If we fast forward to more recent times, we see that the logic hasn't changed. Modern leaders, business people, and even celebrities carefully craft their masks. The businessman who appears calm amidst crises conveys security to the market and maintains his company's value. The politician who smiles in the face of serious accusations confuses opponents and undermines accusations. The artist who cultivates mystery in his personal life generates fascination, even without revealing anything concrete. And the most surprising thing, often, these masks become so strong that even their owners begin to believe them. It's not uncommon for someone to play the role for so long that they can no longer distinguish where the mask ends and their true identity begins. But the power of the mask isn't limited to great historical figures. It's present in the most common everyday situations. Imagine you're in a job interview. Inside, you feel insecure, nervous, afraid of rejection, but you dress impeccably, control your voice, and keep your eyes steady. The interviewer doesn't see your insecurity. They only see the mask of confidence. This mask can open doors that your raw essence never would. Now think about relationships. How many people are won over by mystery, by an image of security, by an aura of strength, even if, inwardly, they are fragile and confused? The mask creates desire, creates respect, creates influence. And that's precisely why Machiavelli considered it a fatal error to believe that being sincere is always a virtue. The shock comes when we understand that the naked truth is rarely respected. The man who reveals all his vulnerabilities becomes an easy target. The man who pours out his emotions in public is seen as weak. The man who exposes his plans prematurely gives ammunition to his enemies. Naivety is a form of slavery. The mask, however much many condemn it, is a shield against the cruelty of the world. And more than that, it is a sword, because those who control their own mask also control the reactions of others. Have you ever wondered why you're so often misunderstood, even when you think you're being clear? It's because people don't see your intentions, only the image you project. And if that image isn't controlled, it will be distorted and used against you. Those who don't master the art of masking give the world the power to define their identity. And what could be more dangerous than leaving your life in the hands of other people's perceptions? There are also unlikely events that show the extent to which the mask can extend. During World War I, reports tell of exhausted, hungry, and outnumbered soldiers creating illusions of strength to deceive the enemy. They made noise at night to appear more numerous, lit fires in different positions, and moved in calculated silence to create the impression of discipline and organization. Often, this mask of psychological power alone was enough to ward off attacks and buy time. There was no real force, only the perception of strength. The enemy, deceived, retreated. This scene shows that, in many cases, appearing invincible is more important than actually being so. Now think about your daily life. How many times have you been respected not for who you really were, but for who you appeared to be? How many times has someone underestimated your abilities because you lacked confidence? How many times have you missed opportunities because you revealed more than you should? The opposite is also true. How many times have you gained credit, trust, or space simply by presenting yourself with a firm stance, even when you weren't fully prepared? These memories are proof that the world reacts to masks. The mistake lies in using them unconsciously, rather than turning them into a weapon. The most disturbing element of this reflection is that, contrary to popular belief, a mask isn't just something you put on your face, but a mental state. It's about consciously deciding what image you want to convey, and sustaining that image until it becomes indestructible. The mask of coldness, for example, demands self-control in the face of provocation. The mask of confidence demands discipline in the face of fear. The mask of mystery demands strategic silence in the face of others' curiosity. All of them are exercises of power. It's no wonder that leaders, strategists, and even spiritual masters have developed ways to mask their intentions. The The Zen master who speaks in riddles, the politician who never answers directly, the businessman who never reveals his next steps. The mask is as old as the art of survival itself. And then a dilemma arises. If everyone wears masks, how can you tell when someone is showing their true colors? The answer is simple and cruel. Almost never. People reveal only what they want to reveal, and this selection is already a mask. Even when they cry, they may be crying for real and, at the same time, choosing the moment to make it more effective. There is no neutrality. The game of life is also a game of appearances, and the king is the one who decides what others will see. The slave is the one who reveals everything and becomes predictable. This may sound harsh, but it is precisely for this reason that the mask needs to be understood not as falsehood, but as a tool. You can wear a mask of virtue not because you are virtuous all the time, but because this image will give you the confidence to move forward. You can wear a mask of calm not because you are calm, but because you know your fury would only fuel the enemy. You can wear a mask of mystery not because you want to deceive, but because you understand that silence is more powerful than exposure. Every time you remember a time when you regretted having said too much, you should recognize the importance of the mask. Every time you realize someone gained an advantage by keeping a secret, you should realize that this is the essence of the game. It's not about being deceitful, it's about being strategic. The mask protects what is most precious, your vulnerability. And paradoxical as it may seem, the mask also liberates. Because when you learn to wear it, you stop being a slave to the need to show everything, to be accepted in its rawest form. You understand that you don't need to expose every emotion, every weakness, every thought. This freedom to choose what to show and what to hide is a form of power that the slave will never have. The slave lives naked before the world and believes this to be virtue. The king chooses his armor and wears it like a second skin. Now, allow yourself to reflect. How many masks have you worn without realizing it? How many times have you been accused of deceit simply because you chose not to reveal everything? How many times have you confused sincerity with pointless exposure? Starting today, you can turn this awareness into a weapon. You can decide that every gesture, every word, every silence will be calculated. You can learn to build the image you desire, not the image others want to impose on you. But there's an even deeper secret. The mask isn't just for others, it's for you too. When you don the mask of confidence, you begin to believe it. When you maintain the mask of calm, your body adapts to silence. When you maintain the mask of mystery, you learn to be content with the power of the unsaid. Little by little, the mask shapes reality. You become what you pretend to be, until there's no longer any difference. And perhaps this is the most intriguing point. By mastering the art of the mask, you not only control the external world, but also recreate yourself. Now ask yourself, would you rather keep showing everything, even if it makes you vulnerable? Or are you ready to lift the mask and transform it into your most powerful weapon? Because the game doesn't end here. The mask is only half the strategy. The other half is knowing when to take it off and reveal your true face at the moment when the impact will be devastating. Are you ready to learn when to be silent, when to wait, and when to act with brutal precision? Silence is the most underrated weapon of all. Most believe that power is shown in shouts, in speeches, in explosions of visible force, but Machiavelli already knew that true kings don't need to speak to be heard. Silence has weight, it has form, it has presence. It disconcerts, confuses, intimidates. A man who talks too much reveals weaknesses. A man who is silent at the right moment becomes an enigma, and the enigma in itself is power. However, silence is not enough. Silence, to be sovereign, must be strategic, and the same logic applies to action. Overacting is wasteful. Underacting is submission. The secret lies in knowing when to wait and when to strike with brutality. The slave speaks because he cannot bear the void, acts because he fears being forgotten, runs because he cannot bear the weight. The king chooses the moment with surgical precision, and when he moves, transforms seconds into eternity. How many times have you fallen into the trap of haste? How many opportunities have you wasted because you couldn't bear the weight? How many words have you spoken and, upon saying them, regretted for revealing too much? The slave is hostage to anxiety. He believes he must react to everything, that he can't leave anything unanswered, that he must be present in every battle. But those who fight every battle die young. The king understands that choosing war is more important than winning every skirmish. It is this composure that builds invincibility. Imagine a simple situation. Someone provokes him in front of an audience. The slave responds immediately, trying to defend his honor, and falls for the other's trick. His hasty reaction makes him predictable, vulnerable, and often ridiculous. The king, on the other hand, observes in silence, not because he's afraid, but because he knows that silence is more disturbing than any response. The aggressor expects fire and finds stone. This emptiness corrodes him, exposes him, leaves him weaponless. And when the king finally decides to speak, his words fall like a sword. Few, dry, definitive. This is the moment when silence becomes government and action becomes sentence. This logic repeats itself in all spheres of life. At work, the silence of those who don't despair in the face of pressure builds respect. In relationships, the calm of those who don't rush to respond inspires fascination. In business, the patience of those who wait for the right moment creates an advantage over those who rush. It is in this interval between waiting and acting that power is truly forged. The slave moves without thinking. The king transforms waiting into tension and tension into domination. But there's a cruel truth. Enduring silence is unbearable for most. The emptiness is uncomfortable. Time without an answer feels like condemnation. That's why the weak rush. They prefer a quick defeat to enduring uncertainty. But uncertainty is the king's domain. He understands that every second of silence is a poison that weakens the enemy. And at the same time, it is also time that strengthens his own resolve. Silence is resistance, but also preparation. And when it finally turns into action, it is devastating. Have you ever noticed how great moments in history were marked not by long speeches, but by strategic pauses, calculated silences, and punctual actions that changed the course of everything? Think of generals who waited through the night in the cold to attack exhausted enemies. Think of leaders who endured public insults without responding, only to later strike down their adversaries when they were off guard. Think of how one word spoken after a long wait seems more powerful than 1,000 words spoken without pause. Power lies in scarcity, and the scarcity of silence is what gives weight to action. But life isn't just about great battles. It's in everyday life that this principle clearly reveals itself. Those who endure a co-worker's provocation without losing control demonstrate strength. Those who don't immediately respond to a message to reflect on its impact demonstrate dominance. Those who remain silent in the face of gossip and don't reveal personal information protect their sovereignty. Silence is the invisible wall that protects you from attacks that don't deserve your energy, and action is the sword that elevates your presence when everyone least expects it. Have you ever wondered how many times you lost because you gave in too soon? How many times you spoke when you should have waited? How many times you acted when you should have endured patience? Life doesn't exact a price from excessive silence, but it does exact a high price from excessive words. It doesn't punish strategic waiting, but it severely punishes haste. The enemy that rushes to attack unprepared is exhausted before it arrives. The ally who reveals themselves too soon is discarded. He who remains silent and waits survives, and by surviving, reigns. And here's the unexpected twist. Silence and waiting are not passivity. They are active, sharp, cutting weapons. The enemy who doesn't understand this tires alone, exposes himself alone, destroys himself alone. When you don't react, the other creates an unbearable void in your mind. He begins to imagine, to project, to torture himself with hypotheses. Are you planning something? Are you indifferent? Do you despise him? Silence becomes a multiplier of fear, and fear weakens any adversary. However, there is an even darker detail. Silence can also destroy you if it is not sustained by discipline. Those who remain silent out of fear do not rule, they merely hide. Those who wait out of insecurity do not dominate, they merely postpone. The slave's silence is cowardice. The king's silence is calculation. The difference lies in intention. That is why waiting must always be tied to a purpose. When action finally comes, it cannot be hesitant. It must be definitive, brutal, and unquestionable. It is at this moment that the king shows why he has endured silence for so long. Imagine the scene. An enemy sets traps, spreads rumors, attacks your image. Everyone expects you to respond. Everyone awaits your defense. You, however, remain silent. The enemy grows in confidence, believing they've won. They expose themselves, relax, and let their guard down. Then, when they least expect it, you act. And this action, swift, precise, and lethal, nullifies months of attacks in seconds. Such is the power of those who know how to wait. Silence builds tension. Action transforms it into destruction. The enemy doesn't just lose, they are crushed by the impact of surprise. Now reflect on your own life. How many times could you have won if you had waited a little longer? How many times would patience have made the other self-destruct? How many times would a single action have been enough instead of 1,000 desperate reactions? The slave never learns this lesson because he cannot bear discomfort. The king, on the contrary, thrives on discomfort until he transforms it into power. This is the essence of invincibility. And perhaps most intriguing is realizing that this principle applies not only against enemies, but also in building alliances. Silence allows us to observe. It reveals who is loyal and who is opportunistic, who remains and who abandons, who supports and who betrays. The king who talks too much never discovers the truth because he contaminates the environment with his own voice. The king who knows how to remain silent discovers what others really think. And this information is worth more than any wealth. But there is also a risk. The risk of becoming too cold, too distant, too untouchable. Silence that inspires respect can, in excess, create loneliness. Brutal action that generates dominance can, if miscalculated, create enemies that are too powerful. This is the balance few can maintain. The power to wait and act is like walking on a blade. One false step, and the fall is fatal. However, those who learn to walk on this blade become untouchable. Are you willing to endure the discomfort of silence? Are you prepared to endure the tension of waiting without rushing? Are you ready to act when everyone thinks you won't do anything? These questions aren't just reflections, they're tests. Because only those who bear the weight of emptiness are worthy of wearing the crown. And what comes next? What happens when silence has been used? When action has been revealed? When the enemy has been defeated? Then comes the final lesson, the cruelest and most liberating. The art of transforming each defeat into power. For the king is not invincible because he never falls, but because he transforms each fall into part of his strategy. Are you ready to discover how even pain, failure, and loss can be transformed into strength? Then get ready, because the final part will reveal the darkest alchemy of power. The moment comes when everything said so far must converge on a final truth. Life is not a place for those who surrender, but for those who transform even their own pain into raw material for power. Many believe that invincibility means never losing, never falling, never bleeding. This is an illusion. The true king is not the one who remains untouched, but the one who knows how to fall standing, the one who knows how to transform humiliation into fuel, defeat into learning, loneliness into discipline. The slave fears the fall, and so never dares. The king accepts it as part of the process and thus becomes untouchable. This is the dark alchemy that Machiavelli already intuited. Nothing can defeat the one who turns each blow into a stepping stone. Think about how many times you've fallen and believed it was the end. Relationships that fell apart, opportunities that slipped away, dreams that didn't come true. How many nights have you slept feeling like there was no way out, that everything you built was lost forever? Now reflect, you're here. If you're here, it's because you survived. This is proof that defeat wasn't the end, but just a chapter. How many times in the past has something that seemed like your greatest failure not later revealed itself as the trigger for transformation? How many times has pain forced you to change direction, and this new direction not led you to something greater? Falling is inevitable, but staying grounded is a choice. The king always chooses to rise. Imagine a warrior alone in an open field. He bleeds, stumbles, barely able to stand. The enemy believes he has won, but the warrior, even though wounded, raises his sword one last time. In that moment, his physical condition doesn't matter. The simple act of not yielding transforms his image. He is not just a defeated body, he is an indestructible presence. The enemy may defeat him physically, but he will never dominate his spirit. This is what separates kings from slaves. The slave bows to pain. The king embraces it as part of his armor. And don't think this metaphor is far from your life. It repeats itself every day in situations that seem small, but that define who you are. When you face unfair criticism, and instead of crumbling, Use it as motivation to evolve. You're acting like a king. When someone rejects you and, instead of begging for acceptance, you hold your head high and move forward with greater discipline, you are acting like a king. When you lose a job but use the experience to reinvent yourself, you are acting like a king. It is in this cycle of pain and overcoming that invincibility is built. Most prefer to play the victim. They spend years blaming fate, others, society, as if it were possible to advance without assuming one's own power. Machiavelli would despise this stance because he knew the world offers no mercy to those who surrender. Mercy is merely a pause before the next blow. What truly commands respect is the coolness of those who do not yield, of those who persevere, of those who do not beg. Respect is born of discipline amidst chaos, and this discipline is only forged in the fire of adversity. If you avoid pain, you will also avoid strength. You might wonder, but how can I apply this in practice, in my daily life? The path lies not in seeking grandiose battles, but in transforming every detail into an exercise of power. Waking up earlier than you'd like is training to overcome laziness. Staying silent when everything inside you is demanding an answer is training to master impulsiveness. Enduring solitude when everyone seems to have company is training to not depend on anyone. These small daily victories build the inner wall that makes you impossible to break. Power isn't born from a single heroic gesture, but from the sum of thousands of small gestures that the slave never has the courage to sustain. And if you still have doubts, remember that every failure carries within it the seed of new strength. The businessman who loses everything and rebuilds from scratch is more feared than the one who never fell. The man who endures brutal rejection and still maintains his dignity is more respected than the one who has always been accepted. The woman who faces devastating losses and still finds the energy to carry on is more invincible than any other. A king is not defined by what he conquers, but by his ability to never be destroyed by what he loses. Have you ever noticed how some people, even with fewer resources, less beauty, and fewer opportunities, seem to shine brighter than those born with everything? This happens because they have learned to transform scars into symbols of power. While the weak hide their wounds, kings display them as marks of survival. Every cut becomes a reminder that they are not defeated. Every pain becomes ammunition against despair. This is the true alchemy of power, using one's own pain as the raw material for greatness. And here is the final revelation. Invincibility is not a gift, it is a decision to never give up, to never remain down, to never allow your identity to be shaped by defeat. You can lose battles, you can lose friends, you can lose loves, you can lose money, but as long as you don't lose yourself, you are still king. The slave surrenders his essence along with his defeats. The king protects it tooth and nail, because he knows it is his last fortress. Now you need to look within yourself and ask yourself, how many times have I behaved like a slave? And how many times like a king? How many times have I begged for acceptance? And how many times have I turned rejection into strength? How many times have I bowed to pain? And how many times have I used it as fuel? Each answer is a map of your journey, and only you can decide where it will go from here. Don't wait for the world to free you. The world only respects those who free themselves. And if you've followed every word thus far, it's because this force already lies dormant within you. You feel that you are not born to be manipulated, not born to be a puppet of circumstances, not born to be a slave to emotions. You were born to rule yourself. Perhaps you've never received a crown, perhaps you've never set foot on a throne, but that doesn't matter. The true throne is invisible and begins with inner mastery. When you master yourself, you already rule more than many who call themselves kings. The call now is simple and direct. Apply it. Don't keep this knowledge as theory. Use it. Choose an area of your life today where you've been a slave and turn it into a training ground. If you're a slave to fear, confront it with discipline. If you're a slave to other people's opinions, impose silence and maintain your composure. If you're a slave to pain, use it as energy. Make your life a fortress brick by brick until no blow can knock you down. You don't need to announce your transformation to the world. You don't need to justify yourself. Just start. And when people begin to notice that you no longer react as you used to, that you no longer beg as you used to, that you no longer fear as you used to, respect will come naturally, not for what you said, but for who you have become. True respect cannot be demanded. It is commanded by the silent force of those who have decided to be king. And if this message resonated with you, if it awakened in your mind and heart the desire to cast off the invisible chains and rise up as sovereign of your own destiny, then leave your mark here. Like this video, comment with your reflections, even if anonymously, even if it's just a single word, because each comment strengthens this community of people who have decided to no longer live as slaves. And above all, subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together, because this is just the beginning, and the next step depends on you. Don't hand over your crown. Rise now. Become king.